Envelope was sitting on my grandfather's kitchen table when I walked in, and it had my name on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Not Grandpa's shaky cursive, not anyone in my family's. Clean, deliberate block letters. Like someone who practiced writing it 100 times before finally committing. I'd driven 3 hours from Columbus after my uncle called me. Not to say Grandpa was in the hospital. Not to say he'd fallen or had another episode. Just, your grandfather is being moved to Meadowbrook. We thought you should know. Click. That was the whole call. Meadowbrook is a memory care facility 20 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. It costs $8,000 a month. My grandfather does not have dementia. He is 73 years old, sharper than anyone I've ever met, reads 2 newspapers a day, and still beats me at chess without breaking a sweat. He was diagnosed with mild arthritis 2 years ago, and that is the full extent of his decline. But when I pulled into his driveway, his car was gone. His garden, the one he'd tended every spring since my grandmother passed, had been half dug up. There were tire tracks in the lawn, like something heavy had been dragged out, and the front door was unlocked. I stood in the entryway and called his name. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of old coffee and the particular silence of a house that's been emptied on purpose. That's when I saw the envelope. I picked it up, tore it open standing right there in the kitchen, still in my jacket, still holding my keys. Inside was a single index card, and on it in that same block handwriting, "Don't trust what they tell you. Check the basement. The gray box behind the water heater, then you'll know why I let this happen." I read it 3 times. Let this happen. I went to the basement. The gray box was exactly where the card said it would be, tucked behind the water heater with a combination lock on the front. 3 digits. I tried his birthday. Wrong. I tried my grandmother's birthday. Wrong. Then I tried my grandmother's birthday. Wrong. Then I tried the year they got married, 1974, and the lock opened. Inside was a manila folder, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter addressed to me. I took all 3 upstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and started with the letter. If you're reading this, they moved me before you could get here. That was always their plan. Fast. Before you had a chance to ask questions. Don't be angry at yourself for not seeing it sooner. I didn't want you to. I needed them to think they'd won. There are things about this family I should have told you years ago. About what happened after your father died. About what your uncle and your aunt did with the accounts. About the house. I put the letter down. My father died when I was 11. Car accident on I-79 in January. Black ice. I'd grown up being told it was just a tragedy. One of those senseless things that happen in winter in Pennsylvania. My grandfather had raised me after that. Quietly, steadily, never asking for recognition. My uncle and aunt had been around in those years, present enough to seem involved, distant enough to never actually do anything. I picked the letter back up. After your father passed, his estate should have gone to you in trust. It didn't. Your uncle helped your aunt's husband, your father's attorney at the time, redirect those funds into a joint account that was never disclosed to the probate court. I have the documentation. I tried to fight it then and was told by 2 lawyers that I had no standing. I was 61 years old and I believed them. I spent the next 12 years paying attention instead. I opened the manila folder. Bank statements, going back over a decade. Account transfers I didn't recognize. A property deed. My grandfather's house, the one I was sitting in right now, with an amendment attached that I'd never seen. A change of beneficiary form dated 3 years ago, redirecting ownership to my aunt, signed, allegedly, by my grandfather. Witnessed by my uncle's wife. My grandfather had never mentioned any of this. There was more. A second deed, a rental property in Allentown I hadn't even known existed, transferred in full 18 months ago. A brokerage account statement showing a portfolio that had been worth roughly $400,000 in 2019 and now showed a 0 balance with a series of withdrawal notes labeled estate planning transfer. My hands were shaking by the time I plugged in the USB drive. 1 folder, 1 video file. Fill name, watch this first, for my grandson only. I hit play. Grandpa was sitting in his armchair, the brown leather one he'd had since before I was born. He was wearing a flannel shirt. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked completely calm. "If you're watching this," he said, "then they've done what I expected them to do. Don't panic. Everything is already in motion. I need you to understand something before you do anything else. I agreed to go to Meadowbrook, not because I'm confused, not because I couldn't fight it, because I needed them comfortable. Comfortable people get sloppy, and I needed them sloppy." He paused, picked up a coffee mug just off camera and set it back down. "Your father didn't just die, son. He was leaving. He'd found out what your uncle had been doing, skimming from the business they ran together. He was going to the state bar. Your uncle knew. I can't prove what I've always believed about that night on the highway, and I'm not asking you to carry that weight. But I can prove everything that happened after. The accounts, the property, the will they had me sign in 2021 when I was on pain medication after my hip replacement, which was not a valid execution of a legal document and which I have since revoked with my attorney in writing, witnessed, and notarized 8 months ago." I stopped the video. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, just staring at the wall above the kitchen sink. The window over it looked out onto the backyard, where Grandpa's tomato cages were still standing from last summer, orange wire frames against the gray March sky. My uncle had been in my life for 23 years. He'd come to my college graduation. He'd sent me $200 every Christmas in a card that said, "Proud of you, kid." He'd stood at my father's funeral with his arm around my grandfather's shoulders. I started the video again. The USB drive also contains scanned copies of every document you found in the folder, plus 3 additional items your aunt doesn't know I have. The first is a voice recording from a conversation your uncle and his wife had in my kitchen in November, when they thought I was asleep in the next room. The second is a letter written by your uncle's own attorney, intended for your uncle, mailed to this address by mistake in 2022, outlining their legal strategy for assuming control of the estate before my death. The third is a sworn affidavit from the notary who witnessed that 2021 while signing, who has since stated in writing that I was visibly impaired and that she should have refused the appointment. He leaned forward slightly. "I have a lawyer. His name is in the folder. He's been holding copies of everything for 14 months. He's expecting your call. His instructions are to file within 48 hours of hearing from you, not before, because I needed this week to happen first. I needed them to move me, to celebrate, to feel safe. Whatever they do in this house between now and when you call that lawyer, his investigator is documenting. There's a camera in the smoke detector above the front door. There's another one in the bookshelf in the living room." He looked directly into the camera. "You were always the one I trusted, not because you're the youngest or because I raised you, but because you're the only one who ever visited just to visit, not to check on the house, not to see what I might leave you someday, just to sit with an old man and play chess and eat bad takeout. That matters more than you know." The video ended. I closed the laptop and called the lawyer. His name was on a business card paper clipped to the inside of the folder. Edmund Voss, Elder Law and Probate, Pittsburgh, PA. He picked up on the second ring like he'd been waiting. I told him who I was. He said, "I know. Your grandfather said you'd call within 24 hours of arriving at the house. He said you'd go straight to the basement." He almost sounded like he was smiling. "He knows you well." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me and I read everything twice. I made notes. I charged my phone. I called my grandfather's cell phone, the one they'd let him keep, and it went to voicemail, but I left a message anyway. "I found everything. I understand now. I'm going to handle it. Don't let them see you worried." I didn't know if he'd get it. I sent the same message by text just in case. By morning, I had a full picture of what they'd done. The house was the centerpiece. My grandfather had bought it in 1981 for $62,000. It was now worth somewhere north of $400,000 based on comparable sales in the neighborhood, and my aunt had maneuvered to have herself named sole beneficiary through that contested 2021 will amendment. The rental property in Allentown, which Grandpa had owned free and clear since 1999, had been transferred to an LLC registered under a name I almost missed, Heron Point Holdings LLC. I searched it. The registered agent was my uncle's wife. The brokerage account funds had been moved to a second account I didn't have statements for yet, but the attorney did. My uncle had also, quietly, over the last 4 years, been named as a secondary account holder on 3 of my grandfather's personal checking accounts. He'd made withdrawals, small enough not to trigger automatic flags, consistent enough to add up to just over $90,000 over 43 months. My grandfather had tracked every single one. The folder had a handwritten ledger, 19 pages, every transaction dated and cross-referenced to a bank statement scan. His handwriting was small and precise and even, like a man who understood that the details were the whole case. I went to Meadowbrook that afternoon. He was in a room on the second floor. Clean, well-lit, nothing wrong with it. He was sitting in a chair by the window reading a paperback mystery novel when I knocked on the open door. He looked up, saw me, and his expression didn't change, but he dog-eared his page, which meant he was paying attention. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said. I didn't. "Did you eat?" "Not really." He nodded toward a bag of pretzels on his nightstand. I sat on the edge of his bed and ate pretzels, and we didn't say anything for a minute. Outside his window was a parking lot, and beyond it, a line of bare trees, and beyond that, a gray sky. Not a bad room, but not his house. "I called Voss," I said. "Good. He's filing today." "I know," he texted me. I looked at him. "They let you keep your phone?" I insisted, calmly, with witnesses. He picked up his mug of tea from the windowsill. "Your aunt thinks I'm confused and harmless. I find it useful to let people believe what they want to believe." "Grandpa," I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I know," he said. "It's a locked. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed you to live your life. You were 22 when I first started putting this together. You were just starting out. I didn't want to hand you this weight before you were ready to carry it." He set the mug down. "And honestly, I needed the time. You can't rush documentation. You rush it and it falls apart." He wasn't wrong. "There's something else," he said. "Something I didn't put on the drive." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Handed it to me. I unfolded it. It was a receipt from a storage unit in Penn Hills, monthly rental, paid through the end of the year. Under the address line in his handwriting, Unit 14. "Code is your birthday. There's 6 boxes. Don't open them here." "What's in them?" I asked. "Everything I couldn't fit in the gray box," he said simply. "The originals." I understood. Scans were evidence. Originals were ironclad. That evening, I drove to Penn Hills. Unit 14 was in the back corner of the facility, a 10 by 10 climate-controlled unit with a keypad entry. My birthday worked. Inside were 6 banker's boxes stacked in 2 rows of 3, each one labeled in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Property documents. Financial records 2018-2021. Financial records 2021-2024. Correspondence. Legal. Miscellaneous. Open last. I opened miscellaneous. Open last first because I'm not great at following instructions when I'm anxious. Inside was a letter. Not to me, to my uncle, dated 14 months ago. "I know what you've done. I know all of it. I have known for some time. I am giving you this one opportunity, in writing, to return what you've taken and correct the documents while the correction can still be framed as an administrative error. If you choose not to, I will proceed. I want you to know that I am not doing this out of anger. I am doing this because my grandson deserves what his father intended for him, and because I am not going to leave this earth having said nothing." Below it, paper-clipped, was a certified mail receipt. My uncle had signed for the letter. 14 months ago. He'd done nothing. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit for a while, just holding the letter. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. It smelled like cardboard and dust, and something faintly like the cedar chest my grandfather kept in his bedroom, which is a smell I associate with being a kid and sitting on his bedroom floor while he told me stories about when he was young. My uncle had signed for that letter and done nothing, and then a year later helped arrange to have my grandfather placed in memory care. I drove home and I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my aunt or my uncle or my cousin who'd sent me a breezy, "Hey, heard Gramps is getting some extra care. Hope he's doing well" message that morning that I hadn't responded to. I just went to sleep, because Voss had told me the filing would go through in the morning and I needed to be clear-headed for what came next. The filing went through at 9:37 a.m. By noon, my uncle was calling me. I watched his name light up my phone screen 4 times in a row before it went to voicemail each time. Then my aunt called once. Then my cousin sent a text that said, "Can you please call your uncle? He's pretty upset about some legal thing. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I drove back to Meadowbrook and sat with my grandfather for 2 hours. We played cards. He beat me 3 times in a row at gin rummy and looked very satisfied about it. A nurse came in around 2 o'clock and asked if I was family, and I said yes, and she said my grandfather had been asking when I was coming back since yesterday, and he gave her a look that could have stripped paint. I said no such thing, he told her, but he was almost smiling. That afternoon, Voss called me with an update. The emergency petition for review of the Meadowbrook placement had been accepted. A hearing was scheduled for 11 days out. The will contest was filed. The LLC transfer of the Allentown property was under review by the Allegheny County Probate Court. A fraud referral had been made to the State Attorney General's Elder Financial Exploitation Unit based on the scope of the account withdrawals. "Your grandfather is very thorough," Voss said. "He really is," I said. In 20 years of elder law practice, I have never received a client file that was more complete before I opened it. He had essentially done 70% of the work himself. That night, my uncle showed up at my grandfather's house. I was still there, sleeping in my old room. The one with the slanted ceiling that I'd had from age 11 to 18, which still had a faded poster of a baseball team on the back of the door. I heard the knock at around 8:30, looked through the peephole, and didn't open the door. He knocked harder. "I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway." I still didn't open the door. "This is a misunderstanding," he called through it. "Whatever Voss told you, whatever your grandfather told you, you're only getting one side. You don't know the full picture." I thought about the 19-page handwritten ledger. I thought about the voice recording of his kitchen conversation. I thought about the certified mail receipt he'd signed and done nothing about. "We're family," he said. His voice changed slightly, less firm. "I practically helped raise you. After your father, we were there. Your aunt and I were there. You can't honestly think." "Go home," I said through the door. "Calm, even. Don't come back to this property. Voss has already filed the trespass notice with the court as a precautionary measure. You being here is now documented." Silence. Then footsteps on the porch, a car door, an engine. He left. I stood in the hallway for a minute and then went back to the kitchen and made tea, because it's what my grandfather would have done. And right then I needed to feel like him a little bit. The hearing 11 days later was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. No shouting, no dramatic reveals. Just a conference room at the courthouse, 2 attorneys on each side, a judge who had clearly reviewed the materials and had questions, and my grandfather, who had been transported from Meadowbrook in a car service he'd arranged himself, wearing his good jacket, with a folder of his own under his arm, even though Voss had told him he didn't need to bring anything. The judge asked my grandfather directly whether he wished to remain at Meadowbrook. My grandfather said no, clearly and without hesitation, and then said, "I would like it noted for the record that I was not consulted prior to this placement and that my consent was not obtained." The judge noted it. The placement was vacated that afternoon. My uncle's attorney made a series of arguments about family concern and documented health decline that were met with the sworn affidavit from his own physician, my grandfather's doctor of 11 years, stating that he had no diagnosis that would impair his decision-making capacity and that no such placement had been recommended medically. My aunt was in the hallway when we came out. She looked smaller than I remembered, which surprised me. I had been expecting anger or maybe more denial, but she just looked tired. She didn't speak to me. She looked at my grandfather and started to say something, and he looked back at her with an expression I won't try to describe, and she stopped. He was home by 4 o'clock. He stood in the doorway of his house for a moment before going in, the way you do when you've been somewhere else and you're relearning the shape of a place. Then he walked straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The legal process took months after that. The will contest moved forward. The LLC transfer of the Allentown property was unwound by order of the probate court in June. The brokerage funds, a significant portion, not all, were traced and a judgment entered. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into the account withdrawals, and my uncle's name appeared in the public filings, which I did not orchestrate but did not mind. My cousin, my uncle's daughter, sent me a long email in April that was equal parts apology and self-justification. I read it. I didn't respond. She wasn't the one who'd done the work, but she also wasn't the one who'd done nothing when doing nothing was a choice. I decided I didn't need to make a decision about her right away and filed the email in a folder I labeled later. My grandfather's attorney updated his estate documents completely. Clean. Clear, no amendments, no codicils, no joint account holders. Just a straightforward document witnessed by two people who had no stake in it, signed by a man who was completely lucid and knew exactly what he was doing. He gave me a copy for my own records. I put it with the documents from the gray box behind the water heater, which I'd returned to its spot because my grandfather said it felt right to keep things where they belong. One evening in late spring, I came over for dinner. He made soup from scratch the way he always had. We ate at the kitchen table. The window over the sink was open and it smelled like cut grass and something blooming. He'd replanted the part of the garden that had been dug up. The tomato cages were back in place. I asked him, somewhere in the middle of dinner, whether he'd been scared. When it was all still in motion. When they moved him and he was sitting in that room at Meadowbrook waiting to see what I would do. He thought about it for a moment. "No," he said. "I knew you'd go straight to the basement. You couldn't have known that." "I've known you for 30 years, he said. "You've never walked past a closed door in your life without wanting to know what's on the other side." He was right, and we both knew it, and we finished our soup. I drove home that night with the windows down. The air still had that edge of spring cold that you get in Pennsylvania in May. The kind that makes you feel awake. I'd been thinking all week about writing everything down, not for any particular reason, not for anyone to read, just because I'd been carrying it for months, and I thought maybe putting it in order would help it settle. Some people would say my grandfather was too patient, that he should have fought back sooner, made noise, not waited. I understand that instinct. But I watched what patience built. 19 pages of a ledger, 6 boxes of originals, a lawyer primed and ready, a net that had been woven so carefully and so quietly that by the time anyone knew it existed, they were already inside it. He spent 12 years watching and documenting and waiting because he wanted it to be airtight, not just enough, airtight. Because he understood that the only thing worse than letting it happen would be fighting it and losing. He didn't lose. And the house still smells like coffee and old newspapers, and the particular kind of quiet that belongs to people who know exactly who they are. And the garden came back, every bit of it, by the end of July. I keep thinking about that certified mail receipt. My uncle's signature, neat and unhurried, dated 14 months before any of this came to a head. He'd read my grandfather's letter. He'd understood exactly what it said, and he put it down and done nothing. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he calculated that my grandfather was old and tired and running out of time, and that waiting was cheaper than stopping. That calculation was the thing that undid him. Not the fraud itself, not the transfers, not even the forged will signature. Those were the crimes, but the receipt was the character. It showed what kind of person chooses to look at a warning from someone they're supposed to love and decide, quietly, that the odds are in their favor. What I watched my grandfather do over 12 years was something different. It wasn't just patience. Patience is passive. What he built was active. Every page of that ledger, every scanned document, every conversation he sat through knowing what was happening underneath it, required a level of self-discipline that I don't think most people understand until they've tried to hold something together quietly for a very long time. He was angry, I'm sure. He had to have been. But he never let the anger make the decisions. He let the evidence do that. I think about that a lot now when I'm in situations where I want to react immediately. My grandfather would have said, and I can hear his voice when I think it, that you don't win by being louder. You win by being right and being ready, and making sure there's no version of events where the other side can claim confusion. There's something I've started to believe, not from a book or a class, but just from watching this play out. The people who take from others are almost always counting on the other person being unwilling to do the hard, slow, unglamorous work of proving it. My uncle counted on that. He figured that even if my grandfather knew, knowing wasn't enough, that the gap between knowing and being able to prove it in a courtroom would protect him. He was wrong about my grandfather. He'd always been wrong about my grandfather. He just didn't know it until it was too late to matter. I'm 31 years old, and I spent most of my 20s thinking that honesty was something you either had or you didn't. A fixed trait, like eye color. Watching what my grandfather built taught me it's actually a practice. A daily one. It's not just about telling the truth when asked. It's about keeping records. Keeping your word. Doing what you said you'd do even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Because the accumulation of that over years, over decades, is what actually holds when things fall apart. My grandfather is 73 and he still beats me at chess. He's back in his house. The garden came back. The tomatoes came in heavy in August, and he left a bag of them on my passenger seat one Sunday when I wasn't looking, the way he's done my whole life. No note. He didn't need to leave one. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be believed. He just made sure that when it mattered, he was impossible to argue with. That's not luck. That's character. Built slowly, on purpose, one careful page at a time.